Ah, the medieval virginity test. A charming mix of superstition, pseudoscience and pure male panic wrapped up in a veil of honour. Imagine a world where your worth as a woman hinged on a flimsy membrane and the ability to bleed on command. Let's dive into the hilariously absurd ways our medieval ancestors tried to prove a woman's purity, shall we? From inspecting bedsheets like forensic scientists to believing in magical hymens, we're about to uncover the ridiculous lengths people went to in the name of, well, something that rhymes with patriarchy. So, buckle up, my friends, and get ready for a wild ride through history's most ridiculous attempts at understanding the female anatomy. Right, let's start with the ever-so-reliable hymen check. You see, in the medieval mind, the hymen was like some sort of magical chastity shield, protecting a woman's virtue with the tenacity of a knight guarding his castle. Never mind that hymens can be naturally absent, torn during exercise, or even just disappear after a particularly vigorous sneeze. If the midwife squinted hard enough and couldn't spot the elusive hymen, well then, you were practically a scarlet woman. Cue the gasps, the fainting couches, and the poor husband wondering if he'd accidentally married a succubus. It's amazing how much stock they put in a tiny piece of tissue, isn't it? You'd think they'd have more pressing concerns like, oh, I don't know, the plague ravaging Europe or the fact that most people bathed once a year if they were lucky. But no, the state of a woman's hymen was clearly a matter of national importance. And heaven forbid a woman dared to suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be other indicators of a person's character besides their anatomy. Ah, the wedding night. A time for romance, intimacy and public bloodstain analysis? Yes, you heard that right. In medieval times, nothing said happily ever after quite like a group of in-laws crowding outside the honeymoon suite, eagerly awaiting the unveiling of the blooded bedsheet. Because, of course, the only way to prove a woman's virginity was through a theatrical display of bodily fluids. Forget about love, trust or even basic human decency. What really mattered was whether or not the bride bled like a stuck pig on her wedding night. The pressure must have been immense. Can you imagine? Trying to enjoy your first night of married bliss with the knowledge that your entire family is waiting to analyse your bed linens. It's enough to give anyone performance anxiety, wouldn't you say? And if, heaven forbid, the sheet was disappointingly bloodless? Well, accusations were flung, reputations were ruined, and the poor bride was often ostracised or worse, all because of a bit of missing crimson. Of course, resourceful women being resourceful women, they found ways to circumvent this ridiculous ritual. Smuggling animal blood into the bedchamber became something of a cottage industry, with entrepreneurial ladies offering discreet pouches of goat plasma for a small fee. Now, let's talk about the virgin glow assessment, because apparently in the medieval period, virginity was less about a physical state and more about achieving the right kind of luminosity, I suppose. Imagine this. A group of serious-looking individuals, probably old men with beards longer than Rapunzel's hair, gathered around a young woman, squinting at her face as if trying to decipher ancient runes. They'd scrutinize her complexion for any sign of a blush. Scandalous. Examine her posture for any hint of confidence. Clearly a harlot. And God forbid, if the poor girl dared to meet their gaze with anything other than utter terror and submission, well, that was just confirmation of their suspicions. Look at her, flaunting her ability to make eye contact. Clearly not a virgin, they'd whisper amongst themselves, stroking their beards thoughtfully. It was all so utterly subjective and arbitrary, like trying to judge the quality of a painting based on the artist's shoe size. And yet this nonsensical practice held real power, influencing everything from marriage prospects to social standing. Chapter 4. The Supernatural Stunt Show. Now, if you thought the previous tests were absurd, buckle up, because it's about to get even more ridiculous. Enter the supernatural stunt show where medieval superstition met medieval misogyny in a glorious spectacle of nonsense. Picture this, a young woman accused of impurity, dragged before a crowd of onlookers, fear etched on her face. And how is her innocence to be proven? Why? By subjecting her to trials by fire, of course. Because clearly the only way to determine a woman's virtue is to see how well she can handle walking barefoot across hot coals or holding a scorching hot iron rod. If she emerges unscathed, well, she's a virgin, obviously blessed by God himself. But if she suffers burns, well, that's the devil's work, proof of her wickedness and deceit. Off to the nunnery with her. Or, worse, it's enough to make you wonder if anyone back then had ever heard of things like, basic human physiology or the concept of nerve endings. But no, logic and reason had no place in these theatrical displays of medieval justice. Chapter 5. The Midwife. Checkup. The midwife. A revered figure in medieval society entrusted with ushering new life into the world and apparently also tasked with being the ultimate arbiter of female virtue. Because who better to judge a woman's sexual history than the person who's probably seen more vaginas than a Renaissance sculptor? Imagine, if you will, a poor young woman stripped bare, legs akimbo, while the midwife pokes and prods, muttering things like, yes, quite tight. Or perhaps not tight enough. As if vaginas were medieval torture devices with varying degrees of springiness. And if the midwife, in her infinite wisdom, decided that things weren't quite virginal enough for her liking, well, that was that. Her word was law, backed by centuries of tradition and the unquestioned authority granted to anyone who could successfully deliver a baby without the aid of modern medicine. Of course, the whole process was about as scientific as a game of pin the tail on the donkey, relying on subjective interpretations of anatomy and a healthy dose of good old-fashioned guesswork. Chapter 6. The Honorary Bloodhound Family. Now, we've talked about the midwives, the priests, the village elders, but let's not forget the unsung heroes of the medieval virginity test, the family. Because in the good old days, nothing said we love and support you, quite like transforming your entire household into a dedicated team of amateur gynecological investigators. Imagine this. It's your wedding night. You've just consummated your marriage, and before you can even say, pass the mead, your mother bursts into the room, eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and morbid curiosity. Close behind her is a gaggle of aunts, uncles, cousins, and possibly even the family dog, all eager to inspect the bloodied evidence of your deflowering. Aunt Mildred starts analysing the sheet's thread count, Uncle Roger launches into a detailed interrogation about the mechanics of the act, and your grandmother, bless her heart, starts crying tears of joy, or perhaps relief, that the family honour remains intact. It's like a scene straight out of a Monty Python sketch, only less funny and more invasive. Because in this culture of collective obsession, a woman's virginity wasn't her own. It belonged to her entire lineage, a badge of honour to be guarded and scrutinised with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a field mouse. And if the inspection didn't yield the desired results, well, let's just say it wasn't just the bride who faced the consequences. So, there you have it. A whirlwind tour through the wacky world of medieval virginity tests. From inspecting hymens to analysing bed sheets, from scrutinising facial expressions to subjecting women to trials by fire, our ancestors certainly went to some extraordinary lengths to control women's bodies and police their sexuality. The medieval virginity test wasn't just a method, it was a full-blown circus of ignorance. It relied on myths, humiliation, and the fragile male ego. Thank goodness humanity eventually realised that virginity is neither a medical condition nor anyone's business. Perhaps it's a reminder to question everything, to challenge outdated beliefs, and to never ever let anyone tell you what your body should or shouldn't do, like share and subscribe.
The champion of non-violence and spiritualizing romance. Sounds strange. Imagine if the 19th